Hi, welcome back to the channel. I'm Michelle, and today for our homeschool update, we are going to be talking about group subjects. And the majority of our group subjects come from Torchlight Level 3. If you're new here, I have a 4th grader and a K through 1st grader. We do Level 3 together. I have an entire video, kind of how I organize Torchlight Level 3 if you want to see inside the binder and more organizational. I'll link that up above. But I have to say that this is probably one of our favorite curriculums we use. Now to say, if the library didn't have a lot of the books, I don't think we could afford to use it, but luckily our library is capable of pulling books from other libraries in the nearby area, so we get most of our books for this from the library, but I have purchased some through the years. But first we'll talk about read alouds. So the thing I often hear about Torchlight is, well, it's a glorified reading list, which I think is funny because although it does have wonderful reading suggestions, there are so many more aspects to it that are amazing. And the great thing about Torchlight is you can take what you want from it and not use the entire thing as it's written or how it's done. One of the questions I often get is, have I ever looked into Build Your Library? And the question is yes, I did before trying Torchlight Level 2, look at both options. And honestly, the reason I went with Torchlight Level 3 or Torchlight in general, was the book selection. The book selections in Torchlight are a lot more modern than in Build Your Library. And I am not a fan of dictation or narration or copy work. So those things are often seen in Build Your Library. We don't do those things. So for this, it just made more sense. And I think, yes, more classical books touch on themes like classism, sexism, racism. You'll get little hints of it within the reading, but for example, Shakespeare would be considered classical literature. It's very difficult for children to pick out those themes because of the way it's written or the nuances within it. They're just not trained really to pick those out yet, while I find more modern literature really presents it from that person's perspective and tries to bring in multiple perspectives, and you get a lot more diversity and inclusiveness in it, which I think is just really a lot more well-rounded. Now, Torchlight does cover books that are deep. They go really deep, so I'm going to talk about a couple of those. So far we've done Shakespeare's Secret. That was our first book, and that went perfectly as an introduction to Shakespeare. My 9-year-old loved the book. She was really disappointed there weren't more. But it's a fictional story about a girl named Hero. Obviously, she was named after one of the Shakespeare plays, and her father is a Shakespearean scholar, so he knows all about Shakespeare. And it's a mystery, so they're trying to find a missing diamond. And it was perfectly done to kind of interweave some of the history of Shakespeare into the literature and make it exciting. So that was a big hit. It also, touches on subjects like bullying and being the new kid and how difficult it can be to just be a kid sometimes, which I think both my 9 and 5-year-old really appreciated, that you're really getting the perspective from a child. The second one we read was, and again, when I say read, we do audiobooks for this. I highly suggest audiobooks if you have not tried them. I really like that. 1, I don't have to read. 2, if the library doesn't have it, they usually, Hoopla or Libby or those kind of programs will have the audiobook. And 3, it really helps bring the characters alive and give their voice. I read somewhere a long time ago that audiobooks are beneficial because it gives your children a different voice in their head besides their own. Because when you read a book, it's in your voice and your accent or dictation or whatever you have. Getting other perspectives and things like that is helpful. So, All Rise for Honorable Perry T. Cook is about a boy, I believe he was in 6th grade, Perry. He grew up in a correctional facility living with his mother, and one of the local attorneys finds out and has him removed, and he has to go into a foster care situation. And it definitely talked about some deep subjects, but completely age appropriate. Even my 5-year-old, it was completely fine. And I think sometimes parents shy away from talking about difficult things because 1, they don't want to burst the bubble for their children. The world isn't perfect. 2, it makes them uncomfortable and they're not sure how to bring it up, or they simply don't believe it. But I think not exposing or educating our children on issues going on doesn't benefit them. It just perpetuates the system that these things aren't problems. So to truly create change, you have to be aware of the problems and situations going on in this world affecting everybody. And I think it's done. These books are done in a very age-appropriate, it's not something like my 5-year-old listens to it. I don't have a problem with it. It's important to have these conversations even at a young age because these problems do exist. Ignoring them or sheltering them or bubbling them isn't helping them. It's just perpetuating it to the next generation. So, little rant there. But this was a very good book. It talked a lot about misconceptions people have, especially about those who are incarcerated, and how when you can make a mistake, it can affect your entire life, and how people can judge you for that one mistake. And is that right? One thing I love about Torchlight is the lit primers, so kind of like the discussion questions that go along with each chapter. And again, or each book, it goes by chapter, and it's not comprehension questions. It's not, well, what did the character do next, or why did the character say that? It's really asking the reader and the parent to dive deeper into why those characters were acting that way, what situations would cause them, what would you do in those situations if you had to make that choice. And I love that deeper level analysis, not just basic reading comprehension. And one of the questions I got is, why do I do lightning literature and Torchlight? Because lightning literature is more reading comprehension, picking out the elements of a story, grammar, that types of stuff. This is deep level conversational thinking. So that's why I do both. But I really appreciate the lit primers. So both my kids, again, liked Perry T. Cook. And I have to say, as a parent too, it hit me on an emotional level. Because again, you're feeling what this boy is feeling. It's from his perspective. And when you read books from a child's perspective, it's completely different than if you're reading a book about an adult talking about a child, if that makes sense. So they really enjoyed that book as well. The next one we read was Granted, and this was about a fairy named Ophelia, and her job as a fairy is to grant wishes. So the book is about her trying to grant this one wish. My 5-year-old loved the book. She is very into mythical and mystical things, and she's definitely a child that lives in her own world and has a very great imagination. And that book was perfect for her. My 9-year-old liked the book, but she thought it was overly wordy because it's not just describing what's happening or the plot. It goes into so much detail, like describing the entire room around you, or why the character remembers this part, and it just was very lengthy in words. But again, my 5-year-old loves that because she's in her own world all the time, and she creates her own world just like Ophelia did in this story. And again, it has great discussion topics. You know, they run into a dog who was mistreated, and the fairy is dealing with things like perfectionism and letting go of those and deciding ultimately what is right. Is it right to do what you're told, or is it right to do what you think is right? So really great themes pulled out of those. So 5 that is just there on the read alouds, but we have loved them all. And Torchlight is great on read alouds and literature suggestions, but I think everybody knows that. So next up, we will talk about Shakespeare. So Shakespeare is introduced in Torchlight, level 3. Now this is the main kind of spine you go with, and it goes over kind of, memorization of Shakespeare passages and what those mean and what the actual writing means. And I'm not a big fan of memorization. I think so much of my public school education was just blatant memorization that I usually shy away from it. I'm not a fan of it. But I think this is well done because I think you're given passages and stuff through access in this book. There's a website, you can go to the website for this and it'll give you access where you go through and you memorize the lines from a Shakespeare play. So for example, the first couple of weeks we learned about Midsummer's Night's Dream, and this was the passage that we memorized. And it really helped, I think, memorization with Shakespeare because learning the rhythm. Shakespeare can be very difficult to understand, and I say that even as an adult. I remember in high school and college, it was difficult to understand at points because it's written in a way that we don't necessarily speak. So understanding the rhythm and how Shakespeare wrote it and the words he chose and why he chose them, I think was very beneficial to my kids. Now my 5-year-old, she memorized the entire first passage. And that was just by listening to us. She wasn't doing anything special. She was usually coloring a fairy book while we were listening to the audio version of it, because of course there's an audio passages that go for it with you as well. But I think it was really beneficial for us to learn the rhythm, be able to speak it, to better understand the plays when we're reading them. Now my oldest, the only problem she had was she's a perfectionist, so she would like be really hard on herself, like I have to remember this, I have to remember this. I'm like, chill out, you don't, it's not that big of a deal. But she eventually chilled out and realized it was just for fun and got very dramatic and into it. So we've been having fun with Shakespeare so far. And one of the books that goes with that, and I did purchase this one, is A Stage Full of Shakespeare. And again, I think this does a wonderful job going over just like a synopsis of the play, written in a way that's easier for the child to understand. So we enjoyed that. When we did Midsummer's Night's Dream, we watched the movie with Michelle Pfeiffer, Christian Bale, and that was really good. I think it really helped bring kind of the story more to life, seeing it. So Shakespeare's gone really well, and we will continue with that. Next, I'm going to talk about history. So for history, the suggestion is Curiosity Chronicles Early Modern History. We're on volume 1. Again, love this program. I also bought the activity guide and the teacher guide, but that's an electronic copy. And what I'll do is I will just print out the coloring pages. I think I have a couple here. So my younger 5-year-old really enjoys doing the color pages when we do the read alouds, because again, we purchased the audiobook as well. So this was Capoeira. So she will do the audiobooks. Well, I like that it's split into 2 chapters a week, because before Middle Times was split, it wasn't split at all. It was one really long, like 25-30 minute audiobook section, and that was just too much information at a time. So I do like that it's split into 2 different sections, and they're about, I don't know, maybe 10-12 minutes of a read aloud. I really like that within each chapter there's a little section called the Culture Corner, so talking about the specific literature or art or inventions going on during that time period. So cultural references, so for example there was European fashion we did Copernicus, we did Galileo, we did Shakespeare. So really bringing in those important aspects as well, not just the history but the culture, the art that's going on at the same time. That has been really fun. So usually we will do 2 chapters a week. With the activity guide, you get to choose different activities. So for example, when we were learning about the Taj Mahal, so the kids got to make little Taj Mahal creations, little buildings. We were learning about the Japanese invasion of Korea in history, so they got to make their own turtle ships. And they actually got to take them outside, put them in the water, and like have them do battles. So it was really interesting and a lot of fun. And this was my oldest daughter. And it was like the fuzzy death, I believe, is what she called hers, because it looks all innocent and fun, but this actually sprays poisonous gas, much like the turtle ship did. And these different things shoot cannons and everything. So they had a lot of fun with the information, and it is a lot of information. And do I expect my children to remember every state or every historical figure? No, but do they have a general idea of what happened? Yes. Can they refer back to, oh, I remember us talking about this? Yes, and I think that's the point, especially since we will cycle through history many times, that just laying that foundation and building upon information year by year is what matters, not being able to pull dates or specific figures necessarily, but understanding the time period. So I think history is done very well in Curiosity Chronicles. We've talked about early colonization, we talked about slavery. Those things were handled very well and very from the perspective of those people being affected. So I can't say better things about that. There are some literature that goes with it. For example, we use A Child Through Time, and that, is a specific child through that time period, what their life was like. So the kids like doing that. We have the When on Earth, the history you've never seen before, so kind of breaks it down visually. And what I really like about Curiosity Chronicles is it's a world view. So what I mean by that is you're talking about what's going on in that time period all around the world. It's not just specifically European or American. It's what's happening in Japan, what's happening in England, what's happening in all these different areas, because they do relate to each other. Understanding what's happening on one side of the world affects what's happening on the other side of the world. So understanding how they all kind of meld together and how one thing will affect something else in a different land is important. So I really like that it provides that whole worldly view of it. So Curiosity Chronicles, big thumbs up. Next, some literature suggestions would be Fantastic Failures, True Stories That Changed the World by People Who Failed First. This has been really good. I think this really presents an open mindset that failure is just an opportunity to learn. For example, one of the people we recently read about was Jane Goodall. And Jane Goodall, I didn't even know, didn't pursue a typical higher education. She couldn't afford it at the time, but she still took her passion and changed science, as we all know. So I really like stories like that that highlight that you don't always have to take the most common path, which I think is a good thing when we're talking about homeschooling, because we're already not taking the most common path. We talk about toys, so amazing stories behind some great inventions. So a lot of toys started off trying to be something else, or accidentally they were trying to create something else. So again, that failure is just an opportunity to learn. It's something else that you can do. So that has been really, really fun. We've learned about Monopoly, Lego, Slinky, all those fun things. We've been doing the Book of Innovations, which again comes from Torchlight. So they get to be the innovator. They get to take something and change it. So for example, the first couple weeks, they got to make their own game, because we were talking about things like Monopoly. They got to make their own game. And if you watch my day in the life, you can see what game they created. The second week, they got to create their own play. They had to make a script. They got to act it out. They had to have props. It was so much fun. So those were the first couple ones we did with that. So it really ties into what you're doing. The most recent read aloud we did was George's Secret Key to the Universe. And I don't often purchase the books, but this was at the library for a quarter. So I picked it up mainly because audiobooks are awesome. But what I really liked about this book is it has actual pictures of space. So I thought that was really helpful, especially when we're talking about, because George is a kid who his neighbor has a really fancy computer that can literally take you into space. It's written by Stephen Hawking and his daughter. So it was really good because we've never really ventured into space or the solar system or that part of science yet. So it was really a great introduction. I think it was done really well. My kids really enjoyed it. So I would, again, their read-alouds are just awesome. Their literature suggestions are great. So it was a nice introduction into the solar system. Again, this ties into the same time we're reading the Science Comics solar system books. So we're learning about Galileo, and I actually checked out a large telescope from our library, and was able to look at the stars and the moon. So it ties in all of these things. Your history is tying into it. Your literature is tying into it. Your science technically would tie into it if we did it, but we choose a different science curriculum. But everything ties into it. It's amazing. It's all there for you to pick out what you want to do. So let's see. The last thing the last two things we are doing are science and art. So art, I have a whole video on our art resources and what we use, but these are the main two things we've been using. We also use Paint Lab from Torchlight, which is an audiobook, so check out that book if you want more. Something my kids also, I did not mention in that video, really enjoy doing is Art for Kids Hub, which is a YouTube channel. And they really just enjoy doing it at night, kind of chilling out before bed. But it just takes you step by step how to make different animals and different people, different creatures. So this is always just a fun activity. If you haven't checked out Art for Kids Hub, check it out. It really keeps them occupied for a certain amount of time, and they have fun. So the only other thing we have is science. So for science, we use Core Knowledge. I have different videos kind of reviewing some of the things we did, but starting this past summer and into the fall, we've been doing the human body. We've learned a lot because, again, I pulled information from K through 5th grade because there's different units within each grade level. I pulled the human body unit from each of those grades, and we kind of slowly built upon the knowledge we learned. I have this for the experiment book. Core Knowledge does offer different activities and experiments and different things you can do within its own curriculum. Again, core knowledge completely free and online. You can just look on it online, you can print it, or you can order it if you want. But we use this as kind of an experiment supplementation. So for example, for the ear and learning the parts of the ear, we did an experiment on, covering one ear and throwing something. Could you tell where that thing would land if you had one ear and how that affected you? So that was really cool. We did a red blood cell study with water beads, which was a lot, but it was a lot of fun. So we also have just a bunch of random human body books that we've used. This one came with a skeleton and the 3D image or 3D model of the eye. So we'll just read about that. We have a sticker book that we use with it. But we've covered a lot of things. We've talked about basic systems of the body, skeletal system, nervous system, muscular system, all those things, identified them. We've talked about the muscular system, movement, different things like that. So we have just started our puberty and reproduction unit. Again, I have an entire video on that if you want to check that out, about the resources we use for that, but it's gone really well. I think core knowledge handles it in a very scientific way. So we brought in other resources to talk about things like puberty and sexual reproduction as well. But it's kind of the end of our human body unit, and then we'll go into 4th grade science as a group for my oldest, which I think the first one is weather or something. But it's, I think, learning about all the systems and how the body works, and then leaning into reproduction and puberty was the way to go, because my kids had such a better understanding of how the body works before talking about the intricacies of reproduction. So I would say core knowledge has been really helpful. I'm not sure why more people don't use it. Like I said, it's a free resource. It follows next generation science standards, so it's actually written for use in public or private schools as well as homeschooling. But it's a lot of information, it's well done, and it's all laid out for you to do. So if you haven't checked out that, I would suggest highly checking it out as a free science option. So that is everything for our group work. And I have to say, it's been going, it seems like a lot, but again, you're just picking little pieces here and there, and it all weaves together really nicely. And I hate to say it, it's fun at times. I don't think homeschooling has to be fun all the time, but it makes it really interesting that everything you're learning about kind of is relating to each other, and you're still getting some hands-on things. But we've really enjoyed group subjects, and it's definitely one of the areas I think we learned both educationally wise and personal growth, where we learn the most from. So if you have any questions, leave them down below. Thank you for watching.